Welcome to Comics Bazaar, the channel of comics commentary and arcana. This video features Daredevil issue 192, cover dated March 1983. So, what do you do when Frank Miller leaves the title after a seminal run on Daredevil, really remixing the character for the 1980s? And he's gone, he's taken a deal with DC Comics. He's gone over the street, so to speak, in order to do his own comic, Ronin, and then ultimately he would go on to do Dark Knight Returns. So Daredevil, he's turned it from an almost cancelled title on a bi-monthly schedule to Marvel's second highest selling title. What do you do once he's gone? Well, it fell to Danny O'Neill to find someone to write the next issue, and he found an interesting choice, which we'll get to in a moment. Now, the cover is by continuing artist Klaus Janson, who, is now no longer working from Frank Miller's layouts. So he's doing full pencils and layouts throughout this issue. So it's a pretty decent cover. It's a creative interpretation of a scene we're going to see in the opening 4 pages of the story. This figure down here in the sights of this gunman is Ben Urich, the newspaper reporter for the Daily Bugle. And we obviously have Daredevil here leaping to intervene before he's shot on the street. So pencils, inks, and very likely colours for this cover by Klaus Janson. So with Miller gone, there is a continuing emphasis on the theme of violence, and that really comes through on this cover to keep the readers shelling out for this particular title. Now let's open it up to the first page. And the story begins on the rooftop of the Daily Bugle. We've got Ben Urich, and he's come to the rooftop in order to talk to a colleague of his who wants him to investigate a retired journalist, Jimmy Hughes. Ben says was only the best city editor this town's ever seen, the guy who started me in this business, and you want me to believe he was under the thumb of the mob for nearly 20 years, says the shorter guy. Bought, sold, and paid for it. It's all here. So Ben is skeptical. He wonders why this guy won't do the investigation himself. He says his daughter was followed home from school the previous day. Then we get this interesting upshot here where we see the rifleman from the cover. So it's not exactly the scene we had on the cover, but this is the situation where the gunman is about to fire and Daredevil intervenes, swinging into action there, disarming the gunman of his rifle. So we get some good action here. Ben pushing his interlocutor into the doorway, into cover. And then we get this upshot of Daredevil swinging off the letters of the Daily Bugle. That's where the gunman was perched. The gunman knocking him backwards, Daredevil catching on to one of the to the bugle itself here, swinging around and knocking the gunman to the ground. But the gunman is only playing possum. He says, "You can stop playing possum. Why were you trying to kill those two? I wasn't. So help me, I was just supposed to put a scare into them." So Daredevil, using his hypersenses, can tell that the man is telling the truth because his heart didn't skip a beat. If I weren't blind, if the radiation that gave me my hypersenses hadn't made me a kind of human lie detector, I'd have to take the world at face value. I don't think I'd like that, he thinks to himself. Who hired you? And the guy says, just a guy, I don't know his name. Truth again. So now Ben comes out of the doorway and asks Daredevil, I dropped into your office, heard you up on the roof, then found Mr. Personality here with the gun. Doesn't look good for your friend Jimmy, does it? No. Can you give me a hand, says Ben as he turns around. So really nice sequence, colour hold there in the background. Klaus Janson doing the pencils, inks and colours on this particular issue. But who's doing the writing and giving Daredevil a little bit of snappy patter there that we haven't seen him speak that way over the course of the Miller run, where he became a much more serious, somber character very often. So a little bit of verbal wit in Daredevil's dialogue. Who is writing it? Well, let's turn the page and we get a lovely 2-page spread here. Lovely palette of colours. and the title of the story promises, and the creative credits. So Denny O'Neil got Alan Brennert to write this issue of Daredevil. Now, Alan Brennert is a writer who's best known now for his work in television. In 1978, he wrote some episodes of Wonder Woman, but he went on to write the revived Tales of the Twilight Zone, and also LA Law. He did scripts for LA Law in the early 90s. So a TV writer, he's also written novels, but he did in the 1970s some comic script, particularly for DC. He's particularly renowned for his Batman stories at DC, especially the lead story with Dick Giordano for Batman number 500. And Denny O'Neil, interestingly, getting him to write this one issue. He didn't do very much comics work because he was so busy with the TV scripts he was writing and developing. But here we go. And this is, in fairness, a very good issue of Daredevil. Brennert manages to pick up from Miller's run. So this is in continuity. It's not a story told out of time. Follows on directly from Miller's run, and make it and put together a very thoughtful story, 22-page story, really about ethics, journalistic ethics in particular. This really is a story that is more about Ben Urich featuring Daredevil. That's how I would characterize this story. So we get a nice establishing shot there of the apartment in which, the outside of the apartment in which Ben and his wife Doris live, and a good third person prose caption. So it's worth reading this out so you get a sense of Brennert's style, different from Miller's. So not hard boiled like Miller's. This is much more the style of a novelist, I would say. She wakes, a realist novelist. She wakes to the rattle of garbage trucks in the street below, and to an acrid smell that tells her the neighbour's cat has relieved itself in the hall again. She can't remember a morning that hasn't started that way, not since that trip to Atlantic City she and Ben made 2 years ago. Ben, this is the only time she has to really look at him these days, 10-15 minutes each morning before he wakes, though she can remember a time when they would spend entire days together here alone. So an implication of, early married life. Not anymore. She tries not to let it bother her any more than she does the apartment, the noise, the smells. But some mornings are worse than others, and sometimes all it takes to make the endurable unendurable is one more little horror. And so as she opens the cutlery drawer, she sees all these little cockroaches inside, and she screams. So Ben comes out of the bedroom. What's up? She's smashing the broom there against the drawer. Filthy, disgusting little roaches. I just washed the silverware. Why can't they leave me alone? So she leans into Ben there and says, I feel like an idiot. I'm sorry. Something just snapped. I couldn't stand it anymore, any of it. So Ben says he knows. No, Ben, you don't. You don't know what it's like being here all day. I clean, I go shopping. That's 3, maybe 4 hours. So I watch television the rest of the day. Game shows, soap operas, the Channel 9 movie. Like this close-up on her face. You can see that kind of look in her eye of desperation. Her knuckles up to her mouth. Then you call and tell me you'll be late. I eat dinner by myself, but put your portion in the fridge. Then I watch TV again. If I'm lucky, you get home before the 11 o'clock news. Honey, don't you think it hurts me too not being with you? But it's your job. I know that, Ben. I'm proud to see your name in the paper. I really am. It's just maybe if we had a nicer place, it wouldn't be so bad without you. So that's our starting scenario. The domestic situation between Ben and his wife. She loves him, but she's going crazy in this tiny apartment in a dirty part of the city. So Ben, anyway, he gets playful with her, says he's going to ring in sick. They're going to spend the day together. And tomorrow, he says, we'll go house hunting again in Westchester. I got some new real estate flyers in the mail yesterday, he says. Who knows? Maybe this time we'll get lucky. Well, in a Daredevil comic, is that entirely possible? Let's press on and see. Speaking of Daredevil, here he turns up again. So we get a DeLuca effect there by Klaus Janson. to my mind, not as good as Frank Miller's DeLuca effect. But here we have Daredevil popping in through the open window of the district attorney Maxine Lavender. Recently he saved her life when she was kidnapped by Stiltman, and rather Turk, who had taken Stiltman's costume. And he's there looking for information. The men, oh, by the way, I like this little kind of comical retort of Daredevil's to the DA's question. What would you have done if I'd locked the window? And Daredevil says, I give up. What would I have done? Forget it, she says. So that's the kind of humor. It's a different style of humor from Miller's, and I like it. So Daredevil gets down to business. The men named in these letters were making payments to one Jimmy Hughes. So he's the reporter guy from the opening pages, Ben's mentor, the former editor for the Star Ledger. Interesting. I need to look at whatever files you have on them. So she's a little miffed there. Oh, of course, while you're at it, would you like to rifle through our confidential security files just for laughs? He says nothing, just smiles there in the cast shadows from the Venetian blinds, with which Klaus Janson is doing with the colours rather than ink or a screen tone. Right, some other time, she says, maybe. And for Pete's sake, close your window when you leave this time, would you? So the scene shifts to one of those houses in Westchester. And Ben and his wife are there viewing the house. The wife loves it. She loves the big kitchen. She goes upstairs to check out the upper story again. And the guy here who's showing them around the house, he sees exactly. Your wife seems to have fallen in love with it, Mr. Urich. So now Ben's got a problem. I like the open border panel there, the white background. Can't blame her. It's a beautiful house. But he gets down to brass tacks. Can't afford it. I'm afraid we could barely make 10% of the down payment. I'm sorry to have wasted your time. But the guy grabs him by the wrist and says, wait, I inherited this and some other properties from my brother. He died a few years back. Then the real estate market slumped and I got stuck with the property taxes. I need to sell, Urich. So he says he'll get onto his bank, see if they can come up with some creative financing that would allow Urich to put down the 10%. So Ben agrees to it. Doris comes down the stairs. She just loves it. Oh, Ben, I could look out these windows all day. So he knows he's going to have to get that house. And Farnham gives him his number. Ben gives Farnham his number at work. Why don't you talk to your bank and see what kind of financing we can arrange? And then we pick up with Daredevil out in Englewood, New Jersey. Now, I looked up Alan Brennert before making this video, and he was born in Englewood, New Jersey, in, if I remember, 1954. So interesting that he chooses that, like his where the place that he was born. So Daredevil is out investigating. He's thinking to himself here, old mobsters never die. They just moved to New Jersey. Max's files said this guy was an accountant for the Cosa Nostra in the 60s. With any luck, maybe he kept records for potential blackmail purposes. And then he's into the whole procedural of getting into the house. There's a guard dog there. Now look at that dog. That looks like a Muppet. That looks like somebody wearing a dog suit. So Klaus Janson not using photo reference there, and maybe he should have. That dog is a bit better. That one there is definitely based on photo reference. Much better. So Daredevil gets over the fence here, and the dog is left behind it on the other side. Now he's making his way into the house. There's an ultrasonic alarm system. He's thinking that's a bit fancy. So anyway, he makes his way inside. He disables the alarm system, and then he figures out the combination on the safe using his hypersenses, gets his hand on the ledger inside the records of the old mobster, and what does he find? He says, I'd be a pretty sorry lawyer if I didn't recognize payments to a holding company when I felt them. So he's feeling the ballpoint pen writing with his fingertips. Payments began in 1961. Why do I feel that when I check New York incorporations for that year, the name Jimmy Hughes will be listed as this company's president? So that's the mentor of Ben Urich's. So it looks like he's dirty, that he was taking money from the mob. But why? For what reason? Just greed? let's continue with the story. So soon at Urich's Manhattan apartment, his wife is out in the kitchen. Daredevil shows up in the window, frightens her, and she says, "Ben, pause, it's for you." So now Ben is sitting down with Daredevil, and Daredevil shows him what he found out in Englewood. "When I asked you to help," says Ben, "I really thought you'd find something to clear him." "I'm sorry, Ben," says Daredevil, "but try not to judge him too harshly until you've heard his side of the..." And Ben is too emotional. He interrupts and says, "Harshly? The man torpedoed stories the mob didn't like, gave front page space to politicians they backed. I let him make a statement, sure, but..." And the phone goes, and it's Farnham, the guy who showed him around the house. And Daredevil recognizes the name Farnham. What? He thinks to himself. Now turn the page, and Farnham's got good news for Ben regarding his bank. He can put 10% down. The wife is delighted, and Farnham says, "Believe me, Ben, I'm as pleased as you are. Paper should be ready within a week. You two, open a bottle of champagne or something. I'll talk to you later. Goodbye." And I like the variation there, the open border panel around Farnham and his desk. So Ben and his wife delighted. Daredevil saying nothing. Then he pops out the kitchen window. He says, "Well, congratulations, you two. And Ben, let me know how your meeting with Hughes turns out. What kind of statement he makes. Will do, DD, and thanks." So Daredevil there, he hears the laughter and he curses himself for what he's thinking, praying that the fears and doubts growing inside him prove groundless. So that name rang a bell for him. Meanwhile, we pick up with Ben going out to Long Island. He takes the train out to Long Island. And look at the way this is written. This is all based on Brennert's life experience, that he's taken this journey. It's an hour's ride from Manhattan to Glen Cove, Long Island. And in that time, Ben Urich thinks of 1,000 ways to couch his accusations and discards just as many. Even thinking of the bright new tract home, which will soon be his, doesn't seem to help. And when the train finally arrives, he has a brief sudden urge to get back on and return to New York. But Hughes invites him in, pours a drink for himself, offers Ben one. "No, Jimmy," he says, "I'm here to not to catch up for old time's sake. I'm here to get a statement on reports that you've received money from certain underworld figures from 1961 through 1979. So the guy initially starts to deny, but then Ben just looks at him with that sad look on his face, and the guy breaks down. "Funny, I lived in dread of this moment for 20 years. Had all kinds of answers rehearsed, good ones too. Now I can't seem to think of any." So this issue all about moral dilemmas, and this is really interesting. This little twist that Brennert pulls here, where we're not going to have an easy time judging Hughes. He has his reasons, and Daredevil did say, listen to his side of the story. So he says, "My daughter Julie, she got married in 59, real nice guy. I liked him, I was proud. Later, she tells me, he's mixed up with the mafia. He's in trouble, they're going to make a lesson of him. But I can save him, me, if I spike a story on some 2-bit burglary. Believe me, Ben, I wrestled with that for 2 days, but it's one lousy story on my son-in-law's life. For Julie's sake, I do it," he says. "It starts slow, Ben. A favour here, a Christmas present there. Before I knew it, I was in their pocket. That's how it happens. You wake up one day and you realise you've been made." So Ben here isn't buying a bull. He says, "You could have gotten out from under somehow. I idolised you, Jimmy, and you betrayed me. You know what a fool I feel like now." So Jimmy smashes his glass on the ground. "You self-righteous little who the hell are you to judge me? I have my sources, Ben." And here comes the twist. "And they tell me that not long ago, you killed a story on Randolph Cherry to save your own hide." Randolph Cherry was the Kingpin's pick for mayor of New York. And that's a story from Frank Miller's run. And that did indeed happen when he was threatened by Elektra in the cinema. The Kingpin and his lady assassin lean on you, and you just folded. Ain't that right, Ben? So Ben's caught. That was, he stammers, different. "Sure it was," says Hughes. "Is that why you're so bloody righteous, Ben? You look at me, at what I did, and it reminds you of how you sold out." So a little bit of psychology there in Brennert's script. Ben anyway says, "I'm sorry, Jimmy. I have to write the story. I need a statement. The trip back to New York is even longer than the one to Glen Cove." Meanwhile, In the downtown law offices of Nelson and Murdoch, Matt has turned up as himself to the office. Foggy and Becky there haven't seen him in ages. And again, we get one of these jokes. Matt, I've been calling all weekend. Where have you been? Istanbul. The fat man got a lead on the whereabouts of the Falcon. Turned out to be a dead end. Matt gets serious. Well, that's what I said. I think the bird is in Peru myself. I wonder, is this Brennert like having a little joke about Frank Miller's obsession with film noir and hard-boiled detective stories? Because he's doing something that is a little bit different here. It's more the realist novel. It's more real. It's less genre-based than Miller's stories were. And I think there's a little nod to that. A little, I would call it like I'm trying to think of the phrase I want here. Like a gentle ribbing by Brennert towards Miller. A little bit competitive. But anyway, so Foggy here says, ho, 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 Matt, like these books are on real estate law. We don't have any cases dealing with it. And then Matt gets down to it. Tell me, Foggy, does the name Frank Farnham ring any bells in that steel trap memory of yours? So it will do. Let's turn the page. That's why that surname caught Daredevil's attention. Farnham. Wasn't he our building manager when we were over on West 58th? Yeah, right. Turned out to be some kind of loony underworld chieftain. The masked moron? Marauder, says Daredevil. That's another little one of Brennert's jokes. Whatever. All those guys sound alike to me. Well, turns out he owned, not just managed, that building and a few dozen like it. After he died battling Daredevil, his property went to his brother. So that's the guy we've seen earlier in the story, who seems to have at least as many shady connections as old Frank. So now that confirms it for Daredevil. So now he says he's got a meeting in a few minutes on Park Avenue. Who's based on Park Avenue? It's the Kingpin. So what I like to see here is, throughout this issue, I can see that Klaus Janson's layouts, the way that he lays out the panels on the page, very different from Frank Miller. But one thing he's taking from Miller here is the full horizontal panel for action sequences. So this is straight out of Miller's playbook, this one. But something that's different from Miller is Janson's version of the Kingpin. He's just much more round. He's a big round figure, and he just doesn't look as formidable or menacing as Miller's version of the Kingpin. It's like he's sliding back towards Romita Sr.'s version of Kingpin that became really a bit of a joke as a third-rate rogue in Spider-Man's Rogues Gallery. But Brennert isn't writing Kingpin as a joke. He's writing him as the clever criminal mastermind that Miller did, the way that Miller wrote him. So Daredevil's there for information. The loan that Urich got, or is about to get, the loan was arranged by a bank on whose board of directors you hold a seat. Why? I should think that would be obvious, says Kingpin. Mr. Urich has proven quite bothersome in recent months. I'm simply providing myself with some insurance. You see, physical intimidation is effective only up to a point, says the Kingpin, as he reaches in for a cigarette. Or no, he's reaching in for his cigarette lighter. Cigar lighter. A threat can work once, perhaps twice, then a display of force becomes necessary. A physical beating can instill fear, or it can backfire, motivating your opponent against you even further. Some men can be beaten, crippled, even blinded, and they will continue to fight. Hurt their families, and they will fight even more. In the end, the only foolproof way of controlling them is to kill them. Killing journalists is a high-profile, high-risk endeavor. I will try to avoid it when possible. Far easier to place them in a position where, however unknowingly, they become dependent upon me. Someday, that will work to my advantage. So this is a clever Kingpin. Now Daredevil says, except that I know the truth, and when I tell Ben, it will change nothing, says the Kingpin. Look at that smile on his face. Why else would I be talking to you, Mr. Urich has a dream, a rather small, pitiful dream, but still a dream. And he has a wife whom he would not disappoint for anything in this world. Ultimately, he can only do one thing. Ultimately, he will be mine. So Daredevil, this kind of mirrors Urich earlier with Hughes. Kingpin, you make me sick, using a man's most cherished dream against him. The only thing I've ever seen that's ever made him happy. So Daredevil up on his high moral horse in the same way that Urich was earlier. And now we get another twist from Brennert. I really like this. Indeed, asked Kingpin. And when you found my wife Vanessa alive and used her to blackmail me into doing your bidding, how was that different? So another callback to Miller's Run. And that really catches Daredevil on the hop. He's got nothing to say and off he runs. That's really, really good stuff. And he shows the files to Urich about the loan. I like that little inset panel there, that side profile of him. Eyes kind of open wide with concern. Urich scrunches up the files. Ben, I'm sorry, says Daredevil. Love the lighting here. The shadows cast by the Venetian blinds. Must be my week for good news, says Ben. Nice and dry and sarcastic. Doris has been so happy since we got the news, singing around the house, laughing like a kid when I first met her. She's been so good to me, Matt. She deserves so much better than me. So Matt says, Ben, don't. It's true. When we got married, replies Urich, I promised her the moon. I was this hotshot journalism major at NYU, editor of the campus paper. I smoked Camels because that's what Edward or Murrow smoked. I was going to be, I don't know, the next Jimmy Breslin. Good God, what happened? He asks himself rhetorically. 20 years later, I'm a third-rank columnist on a third-rank paper. And the one story I write that could get me out of the hole I live in is the one story I can never publish. And that is the story of the true identity of Daredevil. So Matt recognizes that, maybe not. But how many other reporters could have even discovered Daredevil's real identity, Ben? Ben's not happy with that as an answer. Oh, sure. Live off the sense of accomplishment. Easy for you to say, isn't it? As Daredevil, you've got excitement, adventure. And as Matt Murdock, you have money, prestige, respect. You've got it all, Matt. And I like this too from Brennert. This prompts a response from Daredevil. A little harsh. Oh, you self-pitying idiot. I'm standing here in the dark, Ben. I can hear your heartbeat, but I'll never know what your face looks like. I can run across rooftops, but I'll never see the stars. I wouldn't have chosen this life, but I've grown to like it. We all learn to live with what we've got. I like that line. Matt's philosophy. Live with what you've got? Sure. But what in God's name have I got, asks Ben. I'm sorry, I had no right to talk to you like that. More than I've been able to find, Ben. Sometimes I think about Heather, or Karen, or Electra, and I wonder if it's not all just a bad joke, if it's really possible to find anyone in this screwed up world, if I shouldn't just give up. Then I think of you and Doris and how you've stayed together somehow despite the odds, and it gives me a little bit of hope, Ben. It really does. So this is really good stuff. This is mature comics from Brennert, really. You make me ashamed, Matt, he says. You're right, I'm a lucky man. Doris means everything in the world to me, and that's why I can't disappoint her one more time. I'm going to buy the house, Matt. I've got to. I'm sorry. I like the way he's putting on his coat there as well. One arm in, one arm getting in. And then the scene switches. Probably another place that Brennert knows. They met here years ago, declares the third-person narration. Back when a day at Coney Island really meant something. Back when Luna Park and Dreamland and Steeplechase hadn't given way to high-rises and condominiums. He was a student, she worked a concession stand. He thought she was the most beautiful woman he'd ever seen. He loved her then, and he loves her now. I love the moonlight there on the Atlantic Ocean there in the dark of the night. And he's there having a dark night of the soul, struggling with his conscience. It's just everything else. He loved her then and he loves her now. It's just everything else that's changed. And there's his wife. She's turned up. And he's concerned that Daredevil's told her the truth about the bank loan. He told you? No. I made him tell me. He came looking for you at home. We waited for hours, then drove everywhere I thought you might be. Somehow he managed to figure out where you were in this huge park. So the climax of the story is going to be what Ben decides. Ben, we can't take that house, you know that. No, honey, he says, I won't let you down again, I can't. Besides, what difference does it make? I've already sold out. I spiked the cherry story just to save my own skin. What's one more cop-out? And then his wife tells him, you listen to me, Ben Urich. Stop letting that eat at you. There's a difference between saving your life and handing that life over to someone else, like Jimmy did. So you're not perfect. So what? Did I ever ask you to be perfect? She asks rhetorically. The man I met here 20 years ago wasn't perfect either, but he had a heart and a conscience, and I fell in love with him because of that. If that changes, I don't know if I'd love him so much anymore. So I like this. 2 silent panels for the climax, the moral climax. They hug. Ben's decided. The house is done. We'll find another place, honey, I promise. And she replies, I believe you, Ben. You've kept every promise you ever made me. Every one that mattered. And that was the title of her story, Promises. And there's Daredevil watching from one of the buildings there as they walk away. The moral decision made. That's a really great story. 22 pages of story and art. No super heroics in this story. We have Daredevil doing a little bit of action here and there, but for the most part, as I said earlier, this is a story about Ben Urich featuring Daredevil, and an interesting follow-up to Frank Miller's run. This is subtle, sophisticated. It is less genre-based than it is realist novel in character, I feel, and a really, really nice character study of Ben Urich, his midlife, where he's ended up is so different from the dreams he had 20 years earlier, but how his marriage with his wife is a strong one, and that's something that Matt Murdock, who has no luck with women, really admires. A lot going on in this issue. So there you go. That's my review and commentary. I do hope that you enjoyed it. Let me know your thoughts on this one as a follow-up to Frank Miller's now legendary, seminal, original run on Daredevil. How does it stand up to your judgment? Let me know in the comments section. If you enjoyed my review and commentary, please like and share the video. It really does help the channel. If you haven't done so already, subscribe to the channel and stay tuned for more content like this.